I was living in a nursing home when my wealthy brother left me a ranch with a hidden fortune in Yellowstone. At that moment, my daughter, who had abandoned me, appeared and said, "Transfer it to us. We'll take care of you, you ungrateful old woman." But when my lawyer walked into the room, "I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached." The sound of Mrs. Henderson's walker scraping against the linoleum floor was the only thing that broke the suffocating silence in the Sunset Manor common room. I sat in my usual spot by the window, watching the same gray parking lot I'd been staring at for 3 years now. 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days to be exact. Not that I was counting. My name is Bernice Walsh, and at 67 years old, this nursing home had become my entire world. Not by choice, mind you. My daughter Astrid had made that decision for me, along with her husband Marcus, on a cold Tuesday morning in March 2021. "Mom, we just can't handle this anymore," Astrid had said, her voice dripping with that fake concern she'd perfected over the years. "You're getting forgetful, and with Marcus's work schedule and the kids," she'd trailed off, letting the implication hang in the air like a threat. Forgetful. That's what she called it when I questioned why $20,000 had disappeared from my savings account, money that had vanished right around the time Marcus needed a down payment for his new truck. But when I brought it up, suddenly I was confused and not thinking clearly. The truth was, I'd never been sharper. I knew exactly what was happening. I just couldn't prove it. I shifted in my chair, feeling the familiar ache in my lower back from sitting too long. The nurses here were kind enough, but they treated us all like children. "Time for your pills, Bernice," they'd chirp, as if I hadn't been managing my own medication for decades before ending up here. Through the window, I watched a family loading an elderly man into their car. His daughter held his arm gently, laughing at something he'd said. The sight made my chest tighten with a familiar pain. When was the last time Astrid had laughed with me instead of at me? I couldn't remember. The memory of our last real conversation still stung. It was Tommy's 8th birthday party, and I'd saved up 3 months to buy him that bicycle he'd wanted. I was so proud, watching his face light up as he tore off the wrapping paper. But Astrid had pulled me aside afterward, her face twisted with irritation. "Mom, you can't keep spoiling him like this. It makes Marcus and me look bad when we can't afford gifts like that." Her words had cut deep, especially since I knew she'd spent twice as much on new patio furniture that same week. "I just wanted to make him happy," I'd said quietly. "Well, maybe if you thought about our feelings for once instead of trying to buy his love." That was Astrid, always finding a way to make my gestures of love sound selfish. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was now paying $4,000 a month to live in this place. Money that came directly from my Social Security and the small pension from my 30 years as a school secretary. Money that could have helped with Tommy's college fund or dance classes for little Sarah. Instead, it went to keeping me out of their way. "Bernice?" The voice startled me from my thoughts. Janet, one of the day nurses, stood beside my chair with a gentle smile. "There's someone here to see you, a lawyer." My heart stopped. In 3 years, the only visitors I'd had were the occasional church volunteers, and that one time Astrid came for Christmas. She'd stayed exactly 45 minutes, spent most of it on her phone, and left with a hurried excuse about traffic. "A lawyer?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. Janet nodded. "He's waiting in the family conference room. Would you like me to walk with you?" I stood slowly, my hands trembling slightly. What could a lawyer possibly want with me? My will was simple. Everything to Astrid and the grandchildren. Not that there was much left after paying for this place. The walk down the hallway felt endless. Each step echoed in the quiet corridor, mixing with the distant sounds of a television and someone's muffled coughing. The Sunset Manor tried to be cheerful with its pale yellow walls and artificial flowers, but it still felt like what it was, a place where people came to wait. The conference room was small and sterile, with a round table and 4 chairs. A man in his 50s sat waiting, wearing a dark suit that looked expensive. He stood when I entered, extending his hand with a professional smile. "Mrs. Walsh, I'm Jonathan Mills, attorney for the estate of George Walsh." He paused, his expression softening. "I'm very sorry for your loss, George, my older brother George." The room seemed to spin for a moment. I gripped the back of a chair to steady myself. George is. When did he? 3 days ago, ma'am. Heart attack. It was very sudden. Mr. Mills pulled out a chair for me. Please sit down. I sank into the chair, my mind reeling. George, dead at 72. We hadn't spoken in almost 5 years, not since our last argument about Dad's watch, such a stupid fight looking back. But pride had kept us apart, and now it was too late. I know this is a shock, Mr. Mills continued, settling into the chair across from me. Your brother left very specific instructions about contacting you. He was quite insistent that I handle this personally. He opened a leather briefcase and pulled out several documents. Mrs. Walsh, your brother has left you something in his will. Something significant. I stared at the papers in front of me, the words blurring together. I don't understand. George and we weren't close anymore. Mr. Mills leaned forward, his expression serious. Perhaps not recently, but your brother spoke of you often. He was very concerned about your situation here. My situation. Heat flushed my cheeks. Even George had known how I'd ended up here, abandoned by my own daughter. The shame of it hit me fresh, like a slap across the face. What did he leave me? I asked quietly. The lawyer's next words changed everything. But before he could answer, the conference room door burst open. Astrid stood there, slightly out of breath, her blonde hair perfectly styled despite the obvious rush to get here. Behind her loomed Marcus, his face set in that stern expression I'd grown to hate. "Mom!" Astrid exclaimed, rushing over to me with theatrical concern. I came as soon as I heard about Uncle George. Are you okay? Why didn't anyone call me first? I looked at my daughter, really looked at her. The expensive handbag, the designer clothes, the manicured nails. All while claiming she couldn't afford to help with my care. The realization that had been building for years finally crystallized into cold, hard certainty. She hadn't come to comfort me. She'd come because she'd heard about the lawyer, Mr. Mills cleared his throat and glanced between Astrid and me with obvious discomfort. I'm afraid this meeting was scheduled specifically with Mrs. Walsh. Perhaps we could— Oh, that's perfectly fine, Astrid interrupted, settling into the chair next to me without invitation. I'm her daughter, and I help manage all of Mom's affairs now. She reached over and patted my hand in that condescending way that made my skin crawl. Don't you, Mom? Marcus remained standing by the door, arms crossed, looking like a bouncer. I noticed how his eyes kept darting to the documents spread across the table, trying to read them upside down. Actually, I said, surprising myself with the firmness in my voice, I'd like to hear what Mr. Mills has to say. Astrid's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. Of course, Mom. I'm just here to help you understand everything. You know how confusing legal matters can be. The condescension in her tone was like a match to kindling. How many times had she used that exact phrase to justify taking over my life? You know how confusing things can be for you, Mom. It was her favorite way of dismissing my concerns, my questions, my very capacity to think for myself. Mr. Mills looked at me directly, ignoring Astrid's presence. Mrs. Walsh, your brother George owned a ranch in Yellowstone County, Montana. 2,000 acres of pristine land that's been in your family for over 60 years. I blinked in surprise. George had a ranch, but he worked at the grain elevator. That was his day job, yes. But he inherited the property from your Uncle Robert and had been running cattle on it for decades. Mr. Mills pulled out a photograph and slid it across the table. This is the main house and surrounding buildings. The photograph showed a beautiful log home nestled against rolling hills, with a red barn and several outbuildings scattered across green pastures. Mountains rose in the distance, creating a backdrop that looked like something from a postcard. It was nothing like the modest apartment where George had lived in town. Why didn't he ever tell me? I whispered, tracing the edges of the photograph with my finger. Your brother was a very private man. He believed in living simply, even though he— Mr. Mills paused, glancing at Astrid, who was leaning forward with barely contained excitement. Perhaps we should discuss the details privately. No need for that, Astrid said quickly. Like I said, I help Mom with everything now. Right, Mom? She squeezed my hand harder than necessary, her nails digging into my skin. I pulled my hand away. What details, Mr. Mills? The lawyer opened another folder and pulled out a bank statement. When he slid it across the table, I had to read the numbers 3 times before they made sense. $8,400,000. George was very conservative with his investments, Mr. Mills explained. He purchased gold when prices were low, invested in treasury bonds, and bought shares in several blue-chip companies over the years. He lived frugally and let his money grow. The room went completely silent. I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. $8 million. George, who I'd thought barely scraped by on his factory pension, had been a millionaire. Holy shit, Marcus breathed from his position by the door. Astrid shot him a warning look before turning back to me with wide eyes. Mom, this is incredible. Uncle George must have really loved you to leave you all this. But I was staring at Mr. Mills, trying to process what he'd just told me. He left me everything? The ranch, the investments, the mineral rights to the property? Everything, yes. There's also this. He handed me a sealed envelope with my name written on it in George's familiar handwriting. He wanted you to read this yourself. With trembling fingers, I opened the envelope and unfolded the letter inside. George's words, written in his careful script, made my throat tighten with emotion. Bernice, if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're hearing about what I've left you. I know we haven't talked much these past few years, and that's on me. I should have swallowed my pride and called you. I want you to know that I never forgot what you went through with Dad. How you took care of me when I was sick as a kid. How you made sure I got to school even when Dad was on one of his benders. You were more of a parent to me than either of them ever were. I heard about what Astrid did to you. Don't be surprised. This is a small town, and word gets around. I know she put you in that place, and I know why. I should have stepped in, but I figured you wouldn't want my help after our fight. This ranch was supposed to be yours anyway. Dad always said it would go to both of us, but when he died, I was too angry to share it. I'm sorry for that. I'm sorry for a lot of things. You deserve better than what you got, Bernice. Use this money to live the life you want, not the one other people choose for you. Your brother, George. Tears blurred my vision as I finished reading. George had known. He'd known exactly what Astrid had done to me, and he'd cared enough to do something about it. What does it say, Mom? Astrid's voice seemed to come from very far away. I folded the letter carefully and put it back in the envelope. It's private. Mom, we need to talk about this logically. Astrid's voice had taken on that forced patience she used when she thought I was being difficult. This is a huge responsibility. Managing a ranch, handling investments. You can't possibly do all that yourself. I haven't said I wanted to do it myself. Exactly. Astrid's eyes lit up. That's why Marcus and I are here. We can help you figure out the best way to handle everything. Maybe sell the ranch, put the money in a trust fund where it'll be safe. Marcus stepped forward, his expression eager. I've got some experience with real estate. I could drive up there this weekend, take a look at the property, see what it's worth on the market. I looked at both of them, really looked at them. Astrid's expensive clothes, Marcus's hungry eyes fixed on the documents, the way they'd both materialized here so quickly after hearing about a lawyer. 3 years of silence, and now suddenly they were concerned about helping me. That's very thoughtful of you both, I said carefully, but I think I need some time to process all this. Of course you do, Astrid agreed. But Mom, you have to understand, decisions like this can't wait. There are probably tax implications, legal requirements. The longer we wait, the more complicated it gets. Mr. Mills had been watching this exchange with a neutral expression, but now he spoke up. Actually, Mrs. Walsh, there's no rush. Your brother structured everything to minimize tax consequences, and I'll be handling all the legal requirements. You have as much time as you need to decide what you want to do. Astrid's smile faltered slightly. Well, yes, but surely it makes sense to get family involved in these decisions. Where has family been for the past 3 years? The words came out before I could stop them. The room went quiet. Astrid blinked, looking genuinely hurt. Mom, that's not fair. You know we visit. You visited me exactly 4 times in 3 years, Astrid. 4 times. And 3 of those were holidays when you felt obligated. My voice was steadier than I felt. The last time was Christmas 8 months ago, and you spent the entire time complaining about the drive here. Mom, we've been busy with the kids, with work. Too busy to call. Too busy to check if I was okay. Too busy to take me out for a meal or even bring the grandchildren to see me. I stood up slowly, feeling strength return to my legs. But somehow you found time to be here 20 minutes after a lawyer mentioned an inheritance. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. Look, Bernice, I think there's been some misunderstandings. No misunderstandings, I said quietly. Just finally understanding. Astrid reached for my arm. Mom, please. I know we haven't been perfect, but we're family. We love you. I looked down at her hand on my arm, then at her face. For just a moment, I saw the little girl she used to be, the one who would crawl into my lap when she had nightmares, but that little girl was gone, replaced by a woman who saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience to be managed. Mr. Mills, I said, turning to the lawyer, I'd like to schedule another meeting, just the two of us. He nodded. Of course. I'm staying in town overnight. Would tomorrow morning work? That would be perfect. Astrid stood up quickly, her composure finally cracking. Mom, you can't just shut us out of this. We're your family. I walked to the door, then turned back to look at her. Family doesn't abandon each other in nursing homes and disappear for months at a time. As I left the conference room, I heard Astrid calling after me, her voice sharp with panic. But for the first time in 3 years, I didn't stop to comfort her, to smooth things over, to make her feel better about treating me badly. For the first time in 3 years, I kept walking. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw George's handwriting, felt the weight of his words. You deserve better than what you got, Bernice. The letter was tucked safely in my nightstand drawer, but I'd already memorized every word. $8 million. The number kept spinning through my head like a slot machine that had finally hit the jackpot. I could leave this place. I could actually leave. But even as hope bloomed in my chest, a familiar voice whispered doubts. Who was I kidding? I was 67 years old, living in a nursing home because my own daughter said I couldn't take care of myself. What did I know about managing a ranch or millions of dollars? The morning brought an early visitor. I was having breakfast in the dining room when Janet approached my table, looking uncomfortable. Bernice, your daughter is here. She's asking to see you, and she brought the grandchildren. My spoon froze halfway to my mouth. Astrid never brought Tommy and Sarah here. In 3 years, they'd visited exactly twice, and both times Astrid had rushed them out after 15 minutes, claiming the place smelled funny and was depressing for kids. Tell her I'll be right there, I said, my stomach churning. I found them in the lobby. Tommy, now 11, sat rigidly on one of the uncomfortable chairs, his phone clutched in his hands. Sarah, 8, was fidgeting beside him, her blonde pigtails bouncing as she looked around with wide, uncertain eyes. They both looked like they'd rather be anywhere else. Astrid stood near the reception desk, perfectly put together as always, but I could see the tension in her shoulders, the tight smile that didn't reach her eyes. Mom, she called out, her voice overly bright. Look who wanted to come see Grandma. Tommy glanced up from his phone and gave me a weak wave. Hi, Grandma. Sarah jumped up and ran to me, wrapping her small arms around my waist. Grandma Bernice, Mommy said we could take you out for lunch. My heart melted at her enthusiasm, even as I wondered what Astrid had promised them to get them here. That sounds wonderful, sweetheart. There's this great little cafe downtown, Astrid said, already moving toward the door. Very quiet, perfect for talking. The cafe was indeed quiet, so quiet that our conversation carried easily to nearby tables. Astrid had chosen a corner booth, positioning herself so she could see anyone who might be listening. Tommy and Sarah sat across from us, sharing a plate of chocolate chip cookies that neither of them seemed particularly interested in. I hope you're not angry about yesterday, Astrid began, stirring sugar into her coffee with deliberate care. I know it might have seemed like we were pushy, but we're just worried about you. I sipped my tea and waited for her to continue. I'd learned long ago that Astrid revealed more when I let her fill the silence. This inheritance. It's wonderful, of course. Uncle George was so generous. But Mom, you have to understand how overwhelming this must be for you. She reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. Managing that kind of money, a whole ranch. It's a lot even for someone who's used to handling complex finances. And you think I'm not capable of handling it? I think you're amazing, Mom. But you're also living in assisted care for a reason. The doctors said, What doctors? I interrupted. I've never been evaluated by any doctors except for my regular checkups. Astrid's smile flickered. Well, Dr. Morrison said you were having some memory issues and... Dr. Morrison said I had mild arthritis and slightly elevated blood pressure. Nothing about memory issues. The silence stretched between us. Sarah looked up from her cookie, sensing the tension. Are you okay, Grandma? I'm fine, sweetheart, I assured her, forcing a smile. Astrid regrouped quickly. The point is, we want to help you make the best decisions. Marcus has been researching investment firms, and we think it would be smart to put everything into a managed portfolio. That way you don't have to worry about any of the day-to-day stress. And who would manage this portfolio? Well, we'd set it up so that Marcus and I could help monitor things, just to make sure everything stays safe. She squeezed my hand. We could even arrange for a monthly allowance to be sent directly to Sunset Manor, so you never have to worry about payments. There it was. They wanted to control the money and keep me exactly where I was. What if I wanted to leave Sunset Manor? I asked quietly. Astrid's mask slipped for just a moment. Mom, be realistic. You can't live on your own anymore. Remember what happened before? You were forgetting to pay bills, leaving the stove on. I left the stove on once. One time when I was distracted by a phone call from Marcus asking me to loan you money for Sarah's dental work. Mom, and I was never forgetting to pay bills. You were just upset that I questioned why my bank balance was $20,000 lower than it should have been. Tommy looked up from his phone, finally paying attention. What's wrong with Grandma's bank? Nothing's wrong, honey, Astrid said quickly. Grandma just gets confused sometimes about her finances. I'm not confused, I said firmly, and I'm not incompetent. Astrid's voice took on that patronizing tone I'd grown to hate. Of course you're not incompetent. But Mom, this is $8 million we're talking about. What if someone tries to take advantage of you? What if you make a mistake that costs you everything, like trusting my own daughter? The words hung in the air like a slap. Sarah's eyes went wide, and Tommy actually looked up from his phone. Even the couple at the next table stopped talking. Astrid's face went white, then flushed red. I can't believe you just said that. Can't you? I kept my voice steady, but inside I was shaking. Astrid, in 3 years, you've visited me 4 times. You've called maybe a dozen times, and half of those were to ask me to call the insurance company about some bill you thought should be covered. You put me in Sunset Manor against my wishes and then disappeared from my life. And now, 24 hours after learning about an inheritance, you're here with the grandchildren, talking about what's best for me. We're here because we love you. No, I said quietly. You're here because you smell money. Sarah started to cry. The sound broke my heart, but I couldn't back down now. Not when I finally had the courage to speak the truth. Tommy put his arm around his sister. Mom, why is Grandma sad? Astrid's eyes filled with tears. Real ones this time, I thought. She's not sad, honey. She's just confused about some things. I'm not confused, I repeated. I'm angry. There's a difference. Marcus appeared at our table as if he'd been waiting outside. Everything okay here? I could hear voices from the parking lot. Everything's fine, Astrid said, but her voice was shaky. Mom's just having one of her episodes. I am not having an episode, I said, loud enough that several other diners turned to look. I am having a conversation with my daughter about why she abandoned me in a nursing home and only came back when she heard about money. Marcus slid into the booth next to Astrid. Look, Bernice, I think everyone's emotions are running high here. Maybe we should take a step back. Maybe you should take several steps back, I replied. This is between Astrid and me. Actually, it's between all of us, Marcus said, his tone becoming harder. Because like it or not, we're the ones who'll have to deal with the consequences if you make bad decisions with this money. What consequences? Who do you think will take care of you if you blow through $8 million? Who do you think will be responsible for you when you're 90 and broke? The threat was clear, even delivered in his calm, reasonable tone. Take care of yourself financially, or we'll abandon you completely. Besides, Astrid added, wiping her eyes, what would you even do with a ranch in Montana? You can't live alone anymore. You can't drive long distances. You don't know anything about running cattle or managing property. Be practical, Mom. I looked around the table at my family, at Marcus, who saw me as a potential burden to be managed, at Astrid, who'd convinced herself that controlling my life was the same as caring for me, at Tommy and Sarah, who were learning that love came with conditions and that grandparents were problems to be solved rather than people to be cherished. "You're right," I said finally. "I don't know anything about running a ranch." Astrid's face brightened with relief. "I'm so glad you're being reasonable about this. But I can learn." Her smile froze. "I can hire people who know about cattle and property management. I can buy books, take classes, ask questions. I managed to raise you and work full-time and keep a household running for 30 years. I think I can figure out how to be a rancher. Mom? And if I can't, I can sell the ranch and buy a nice house somewhere warm, or travel, or donate the money to charity. It's my choice to make." Marcus leaned forward. "And what about us? What about Tommy and Sarah's college funds? What about helping your own family? What about the $20,000 that disappeared from my account? What about the 3 years of abandonment? What about treating me like a human being instead of a problem to be managed?" "Fine," Astrid said, her voice cold now. "If that's how you feel, then maybe you should make your decisions alone. But don't expect us to be there to pick up the pieces when everything falls apart." She stood up abruptly, gathering her purse. "Come on, kids. We're leaving." Tommy and Sarah scrambled out of the booth, looking confused and frightened. Sarah turned back to me, her eyes bright with tears. "Are you mad at us, Grandma?" My heart broke all over again. "No, sweetheart. I'm not mad at you. I love you very much. Then why can't you just do what Mommy wants?" I knelt down to her level, ignoring the pain in my knees. Sometimes grown-ups have to make hard choices, even when other people don't understand. But I will always love you, no matter what. I hugged both grandchildren, breathing in their familiar scent of bubblegum and sunshine. When I looked up, Astrid was watching with tears streaming down her face. "This isn't over, Mom," she said quietly. "We won't let you destroy yourself." As they walked away, Tommy turned back once, his young face serious beyond his years. "Bye, Grandma." I sat alone in the cafe for a long time after they left, nursing cold tea and trying to stop my hands from shaking. I'd just declared war on my own family, and I wasn't sure I was strong enough to win. The next morning brought my second meeting with Mr. Mills, but this time I was prepared. I'd spent the night thinking about George's letter, about everything Astrid had said, and about the person I used to be before I let fear and loneliness convince me to accept less than I deserved. Mr. Mills was waiting in the same conference room, but today he had several boxes of documents with him. He stood when I entered, his expression more serious than our first meeting. "Mrs. Walsh, I hope you don't mind, but I brought some additional materials your brother wanted you to have. He was very specific about when you should receive them. What kind of materials?" Instead of answering directly, he pulled out a manila envelope sealed with red wax. George's initials were pressed into the seal. "He said to give you this if anyone in your family tried to pressure you about the inheritance." My stomach dropped. How could he have known? "Your brother was a very perceptive man. He told me about your situation, about how you ended up at Sunset Manor. He suspected that news of an inheritance might bring certain people out of the woodwork." I broke the seal with trembling fingers. Inside was another letter from George, but this one was different. His handwriting was sharper, angrier. "Bernice, if you're reading this, then I was right about what would happen. They came sniffing around the money, didn't they? Probably within hours of hearing about it. I'm going to tell you some things now that I should have told you years ago. Things I found out about Astrid that made me lose respect for her completely. Do you remember when Dad's house sold after he died? The realtor was my friend Charlie's daughter, and she told me something interesting. The sale price was $185,000, but you only got $85,000. When I asked Astrid about it, she said there were liens and repair costs that ate up the difference. That was a lie. I saw the closing documents. Astrid had your father add her name to the deed 2 weeks before he died, when he was too sick to understand what he was signing. She took $100,000 that should have been yours. My hands started shaking so badly I could barely hold the letter. Dad's house. I'd wondered why my share had been so small, but Astrid had shown me bills and receipts, had explained about foundation problems and back taxes. I'd trusted her. There's more. Remember when you broke your hip 3 years ago? You called Astrid for help, and she came over for a few days while you recovered. What you don't know is that she had Marcus go through all your financial papers while you were sleeping. They photocopied everything. bank statements, insurance policies, even your will. Mrs. Henderson from next door saw them doing it and told her daughter, who told Charlie, who told me. By the time I heard about it, you were already in Sunset Manor. Mrs. Henderson, my neighbor of 15 years who'd always been so kind. She'd known what Astrid was doing and tried to get word to George, but by then it was too late. The final thing you need to know is about the money that disappeared from your account. I hired a private investigator after you mentioned it to me. Marcus forged your signature on a withdrawal slip for $20,000. The investigator has copies of the bank security footage showing Marcus at the teller window. I'm including copies of everything in this package. The deed fraud, the bank footage, even records showing that Astrid called Sunset Manor to inquire about costs 2 months before your hip surgery. She planned this, Bernice. All of it. I should have told you sooner, but I kept hoping she'd do the right thing and bring you home. She never did. Don't let her steal this inheritance, too. You deserve better, George. The letter slipped from my numb fingers. Mr. Mills was watching me with concern, but he didn't speak. He simply reached into one of the boxes and pulled out a thick folder. Your brother was very thorough, he said quietly. Inside the folder were photocopies of documents I'd never seen before. The deed to Dad's house, showing Astrid's name added just days before his death. Bank records showing the forged withdrawal. Screenshots from security cameras showing Marcus at the bank. My signature clearly not matching the one on the withdrawal slip. And most damning of all, a recorded phone conversation between Astrid and the Sunset Manor admissions director. Do you have a way to play this? Mr. Mills asked, holding up a small digital recorder. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear it. Astrid's voice came through the speaker, clear and businesslike. I'm calling to ask about your memory care facility. My mother is showing signs of dementia, and we're starting to look at options. I see, the admissions director replied. What kind of symptoms is she experiencing? Confusion about finances, forgetting to pay bills, leaving appliances on. The usual things. She's also becoming increasingly paranoid, accusing family members of stealing from her. My breath caught. Even 3 years later, hearing Astrid describe me that way felt like a physical blow. Has she been evaluated by a physician? We're working on that. But honestly, she's resistant to admitting there's a problem. We may need to move quickly when the time comes. I understand. Many families face this challenge. What's your timeline? Hopefully, within the next few months. She had a fall recently, and we're concerned about her living alone. The fall she was referring to had been me tripping over a rug in my own living room. I'd been fine, just a few bruises, but Astrid had acted like it was a sign of serious cognitive decline. The recording continued with Astrid asking detailed questions about costs, visiting policies, and how to arrange an emergency placement if I had another medical incident. By the time it ended, I was shaking with rage. She planned it, I whispered. All of it. Mr. Mills nodded grimly. Your brother suspected as much. That's why he made sure I had all this evidence before contacting you. But why? Why would she do this to me? Based on what your brother told me, I think she saw you as a financial burden that was getting in the way of her own plans. With you in assisted care, she didn't have to worry about supporting you in your old age. And with access to your finances, she could take whatever she wanted. I finished the thought, feeling sick. Your brother also discovered that Astrid and Marcus were having serious financial problems around the time you were placed in Sunset Manor. Marcus had lost his job, they were behind on their mortgage, and they'd maxed out several credit cards. Everything was starting to make horrible sense. The expensive clothes Astrid wore when she visited, the new car Marcus had been driving, the European vacation they'd taken last summer that they'd posted all over social media, all funded by stealing from me. What can I do about this? I asked. Mr. Mills pulled out another folder. Your brother anticipated that question too. He's already done most of the groundwork for legal action if that's what you choose. The evidence is solid. Fraud, elder abuse, forgery. The district attorney would likely be very interested in this case. And if I don't want to press charges, that's entirely your choice. But Mrs. Walsh, you should know that what they did to you, it's not just morally wrong, it's criminal. And based on your brother's investigation, you're probably not their only victim. What do you mean? Marcus's elderly father died 2 years ago. He was in a nursing home for the last 6 months of his life, and Marcus was handling his finances. The old man's estate was supposed to be worth about $150,000, but when he died, there was less than $10,000 left. Marcus claimed it all went to medical expenses. I closed my eyes, feeling overwhelmed. How many people had they hurt? How many other families had been torn apart by their greed? There's something else, Mr. Mills continued. Your brother set up the inheritance with very specific protections. Even if you wanted to give Astrid access to the money, you legally can't. The trust is structured so that the funds can only be used for your direct benefit. What does that mean? It means that even if they somehow convinced you to sign papers, or if they tried to claim you were incompetent and get guardianship, they still couldn't touch the money. Your brother made sure of that. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt a spark of hope. George had protected me, even from myself. He really thought of everything, didn't he? Mr. Mills smiled. He loved you very much, Mrs. Walsh, and he wanted to make sure that this time no one could take advantage of you. I gathered up all the documents, feeling their weight in my hands. Evidence of betrayal, but also proof that I wasn't crazy, wasn't paranoid, wasn't the confused old woman Astrid had painted me to be. Mr. Mills, I want to see the ranch. Of course. I can arrange for a car to drive you up there whenever you're ready. And I want to know what it would take to live there. His eyebrows rose slightly. Are you sure? It's quite remote, and managing a property that size. I'm sure, I said firmly. For the first time in 3 years, I'm absolutely sure about something. As I walked back to my room at Sunset Manor, the folder of evidence tucked securely under my arm, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Power. Real power, backed by truth and protected by George's careful planning. Astrid and Marcus thought they could intimidate me into handing over my inheritance. They thought I was weak, confused, easily manipulated. They were about to learn how wrong they were. 3 days passed before Astrid called. 3 days during which I arranged for a trip to see George's ranch, met with a financial advisor Mr. Mills recommended, and most importantly, made peace with what I had to do. When her name appeared on my phone, I let it ring 4 times before answering. Mom? Her voice was strained, exhausted. We need to talk. Hello, Astrid. I've been thinking about our conversation at the cafe, and I think we both said things we didn't mean. I know you're upset, but family is family. We need to work this out. I sat in my chair by the window, watching the familiar gray parking lot. What did you have in mind? Marcus and I talked to a lawyer. We think the best solution is to set up a family trust with all 3 of us as trustees. That way, everyone has a say, and there's protection against any impulsive decisions. By impulsive decisions, you mean me actually using my own inheritance? Mom, please don't be like that. This is about protecting you, about protecting all of us. Where have you been for 3 days, Astrid? The question seemed to throw her. What do you mean? I mean, if this inheritance is such a crisis that requires immediate family meetings and emergency legal consultations, where have you been for 3 days? Why didn't you call sooner? We needed time to research options, to figure out the best approach. You needed time to figure out how to control the money. A long silence. When Astrid spoke again, her voice was harder. Fine. You want honesty? Yes. We're concerned about you making decisions that could hurt everyone. You haven't exactly shown great judgment in the past. What past decisions are you referring to? Mom, you let Dad walk all over you for 20 years. You stayed in a job that barely paid the bills when you could have done better. You trusted people who took advantage of you. And look where it got you. Alone in a nursing home. Each word was designed to hurt, to make me doubt myself. The old Bernice would have crumbled, would have apologized for being difficult. But the old Bernice hadn't known what I knew now. You're right, I said calmly. I did trust people who took advantage of me, but I'm learning from those mistakes. Good. So you'll consider the family trust? Actually, I've decided to accept your suggestion from the cafe. Which suggestion? That I make my decisions alone. Another silence, this one crackling with tension. What does that mean? It means I'm declining your offer to help manage my inheritance. It means I'm making my own choices about my own money. And it means I think it's time you and Marcus face the consequences of your own choices. What are you talking about? I pulled George's folder into my lap, running my fingers over the evidence inside. I'm talking about the $100,000 you stole from Dad's estate. I'm talking about the $20,000 Marcus forged my name to steal from my bank account. I'm talking about the 3 years you've kept me in this place while telling everyone I'm incompetent. The silence on the other end was deafening. I don't know what lies Uncle George told you. George didn't tell me anything. He showed me. Bank records, security footage, recorded phone calls, everything. That's impossible. Would you like me to play the recording of you calling Sunset Manor 2 months before my hip surgery? The one where you describe my dementia symptoms and ask about emergency placement options? I heard a sharp intake of breath. Mom, I can explain. I'm sure you can. You're very good at explaining things in ways that make me look confused, and you look like the caring daughter. But I'm done listening to explanations. You can't prove any of this. Actually, I can. George hired a private investigator. Everything is documented, photographed, recorded. The district attorney would be very interested in a case involving elder abuse and financial fraud. You wouldn't. But her voice wavered with uncertainty. Wouldn't I? You've spent 3 years telling everyone I'm not competent to make my own decisions. But apparently I'm competent enough to press criminal charges. I could hear her breathing getting faster, more panicked. Mom, please. Think about Tommy and Sarah. Think about what this would do to them. And there it was, using my grandchildren as shields, just like she'd use them as weapons at the cafe. I have thought about them, Astrid. I've thought about what kind of lesson you're teaching them. That it's okay to steal from family, that it's okay to abandon elderly relatives, that love is conditional on what people can give you. That's not what we're teaching them, isn't it? Tommy is 11 years old, and he's never spent a night at his grandmother's house. Sarah is 8, and she's visited me 6 times in 3 years. What exactly are you teaching them about family? We're protecting them from seeing you, like this. Like what? Independent? Making my own decisions? Standing up for myself? God forbid they see their grandmother acting like she has value. You're twisting everything. I'm seeing everything clearly for the first time in years. Fine. Astrid's voice cracked with frustration. You want to cut us out? Go ahead. But don't come crying to us when you realize you can't handle this alone. Don't expect us to pick up the pieces when you lose everything. I won't need you to pick up the pieces, Astrid. Because unlike you, I'm not planning to steal from family members to solve my problems. You know what? You deserve to be alone. You've always been selfish, always played the victim. Maybe being abandoned is exactly what you earned. The cruelty in her voice should have devastated me. A week ago, it would have. But now, armed with the truth about who she really was, it just sounded pathetic. Maybe you're right, I said quietly. Maybe I do deserve to be alone. But if that's true, then what do you deserve for stealing from me? What do you deserve for lying about me? What do you deserve for abandoning me? She hung up without answering. 2 hours later, Marcus called. Bernice, we need to talk. Astrid is hysterical, and this whole situation is getting out of hand. Hello, Marcus. How are you enjoying the truck you bought with my $20,000? A pause. I think there's been some misunderstanding. No misunderstanding. I have security footage of you at the bank, forging my signature. I have copies of the withdrawal slips. I have everything. Look, if there were some financial irregularities, I'm sure we can work it out. But threatening to involve law enforcement, that's going too far. Is it? You committed a felony, Marcus. Elder abuse is a serious crime. You're talking about destroying our family over some accounting errors. I'm talking about getting justice for 3 years of abuse. His tone shifted, becoming harder, more threatening. You know what your problem is, Bernice? You think this inheritance makes you powerful, but you're still a confused old woman in a nursing home. You still need us. Do I? Who's going to drive you to doctor's appointments? Who's going to handle your medications when you forget? Who's going to be there when you fall and break a hip? The same people who've been doing those things for the past 3 years. Paid professionals who actually care about my well-being. And when the money runs out? When you're 90 and broke because you made stupid decisions? Then I'll deal with it myself, just like I've been dealing with everything else myself. You really want to die alone? The question hit me like a physical blow, because it touched on my deepest fear. But then I thought about the past 3 years, how alone I'd felt even with Astrid in my life, how abandoned I'd felt even though I technically had family. Marcus, I've been alone for 3 years. The only difference now is that I'm choosing it. I hung up and immediately called Mr. Mills. I want to see the ranch tomorrow, I told him, and I want to start the paperwork to move there. Are you sure, Mrs. Walsh? This is a big decision. I'm sure. For the first time in years, I'm absolutely sure. That evening, I sat in my room and wrote 2 letters. The first was to Tommy and Sarah, explaining why Grandma might not see them for a while, but that I loved them and hoped they would understand someday when they were older. The second was to Mr. Mills, with detailed instructions about what to do if Astrid or Marcus tried to claim I was incompetent or attempted to gain guardianship over me. Then I pulled out the recorder Mr. Mills had given me and spent an hour documenting everything I could remember about the past 3 years. Every lie Astrid had told, every excuse Marcus had made, every time they'd made me feel like a burden instead of a person. If they wanted to play games about my competency, I'd give them evidence of exactly how competent I was. The next morning, I packed my few belongings into 2 suitcases. 3 years of life in a nursing home didn't amount to much. Some clothes, a few books, the photographs I'd salvaged from my old house. As I folded George's letters carefully between my sweaters, I found myself smiling. For the first time since this nightmare began, I was in control. Astrid and Marcus thought they could intimidate me into giving them what they wanted. They thought I was weak, confused, desperate for their approval. They were about to learn the difference between being alone and being free. The drive to Montana took 6 hours, but it felt like traveling to another world. Mr. Mills had arranged for a car service, and as we left the flat prairie behind and headed into rolling hills dotted with cattle, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: anticipation. The ranch was even more beautiful than the photographs had suggested. The log house sat on a gentle rise overlooking a valley where a creek wound between cottonwood trees. The mountains rose in the distance, snow-capped even in late summer. Everything was exactly as George had left it, maintained by a local couple he'd hired years ago. Mrs. Walsh? The driver was watching me in the rearview mirror. Everything okay? I realized I was crying, but they weren't tears of sadness. For the first time in 3 years, I was looking at a place that could be home. Everything's perfect, I said. Tom and Linda Garrett had been taking care of the property for George for 15 years. They were in their 60s, with weathered faces and kind eyes, and they welcomed me like I was family returning home. George talked about you all the time, Linda said as she showed me through the house. He was so proud of you, but worried too. He said you deserved better than what life had handed you. The house was larger than it looked from outside, with 4 bedrooms, a stone fireplace, and windows that let in streams of golden light. George's furniture was simple but solid: handmade wooden tables, comfortable chairs, bookshelves filled with ranch management guides and classic novels. The cattle operation pretty much runs itself, Tom explained as we walked through the barns. George built it up slow and steady over 40 years. We've got about 200 head of Angus, good grazing land, reliable water sources. The income covers all the operating expenses and then some. You mean it makes money? Tom grinned. George was a smart businessman. This place has turned a profit every year since 1995. I stood in the doorway of the main barn, breathing in the scent of hay and leather, listening to the peaceful lowing of cattle in the distance. It was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. Mrs. Walsh, Linda said gently, are you thinking of staying? I'm thinking of living, I replied. That evening, I called Mr. Mills from George's old office, surrounded by his carefully organized files and decades of ranch records. How was your first day as a rancher? He asked. Overwhelming and wonderful. Mr. Mills, I want to make this official. I want to move here permanently. I thought you might. I've already started the paperwork to transfer your care from Sunset Manor to the medical clinic in town. Dr. Sarah Chen comes highly recommended, and she makes house calls for elderly patients. I'm not elderly, I said, then caught myself. I mean, I am 67, but I don't feel elderly. That's because you're not living like you're elderly anymore. You're living like you're alive. Over the next week, I settled into a routine that felt more natural than anything I'd done in years. I woke with the sunrise, had coffee on the front porch while watching the cattle graze, and spent my days learning about my new life. Tom taught me to recognize the different pastures and water sources. Linda showed me George's garden and the root cellar where he stored vegetables through the winter. I hired a local woman named Marie to help with housework twice a week, more for the company than from necessity. She was Tommy's age and full of stories about growing up in ranch country. Through her, I met other neighbors, the veterinarian who'd cared for George's cattle, the feed store owner who'd known my brother for decades, the postmaster who remembered when George first bought the property. For the first time in my adult life, I was part of a community where people knew my name and cared about my well-being without expecting anything in return. The call from Astrid came on my 10th day at the ranch. "Mom, people are saying you moved to Montana. Please tell me that's not true." I was sitting on the front porch, watching Tom repair a section of fence while Linda hung laundry on the line behind the house. The picture of domestic peace. It's true. "Mom, you can't be serious. You don't know anything about living alone, especially not on some isolated ranch. What if you have a medical emergency? What if something happens to you? The same thing that would happen if I had an emergency at Sunset Manor. I'd get medical care. This is insane. You're going to get yourself killed out there. Astrid, I've been here 10 days. I haven't fallen. I haven't forgotten to take my medication. And I haven't left any stoves on. I've cooked my own meals, managed my own schedule, and even learned to drive the ranch pickup truck." "You're driving?" Her voice shot up an octave. "Mom, your reflexes aren't what they used to be. My reflexes are fine. What wasn't fine was being treated like an invalid when I wasn't one. I'm calling Adult Protective Services." The threat should have scared me, but I'd been expecting it. "Go ahead. Mr. Mills has prepared a complete file documenting my competency, including medical evaluations, financial assessments, and testimony from the people who've been helping me settle in here. He's also prepared countercharges for elder abuse and financial fraud." Silence. "Astrid, I want you to understand something. I'm not hiding from you, and I'm not running away. I'm moving towards something better. Something you taught me I deserved when you showed me what I didn't deserve. I never meant for things to go this far. Didn't you? You put me in a nursing home and walked away. You stole from me for years. You were planning to control my inheritance just like you controlled everything else. What did you think would happen when I found out the truth? I thought you'd forgive me, like you always do." The sadness in her voice almost broke my resolve. Almost. "I have forgiven you, Astrid. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. And it doesn't mean letting it happen again. So that's it? You're just cutting us out of your life forever?" I watched Tom working on the fence, his movements sure and purposeful. He'd wave whenever he caught me looking, just a simple acknowledgement that I was there, that I mattered. "I'm not cutting you out," I said finally, "but I'm not chasing you anymore either. If you want a relationship with me, it has to be based on respect. Real respect, not the fake kind that disappears when it becomes inconvenient." "And Tommy and Sarah?" My heart clenched. "They'll always be welcome here. When they're old enough to make their own decisions about whether they want to know their grandmother." "You're really going to punish them for my mistakes?" "I'm not punishing anyone. I'm protecting myself. There's a difference." After I hung up, I sat on the porch for a long time, watching the sun set behind the mountains. Linda brought me a cup of tea and sat beside me without saying anything. "George left me a letter," I said eventually. "He said I deserved better than what I got. For years, I thought that meant I deserved better from other people, but maybe it meant I deserved better from myself." "How do you mean?" "I spent 67 years accepting less than I was worth because I was afraid of being alone. But being alone isn't the worst thing that can happen to you. Being with people who don't value you, that's worse." Linda nodded. "George used to say that the difference between loneliness and solitude is choice." A month later, I got a package with no return address. Inside was a school photo of Tommy and a drawing Sarah had made of a house with flowers around it. On the back, she'd written, "I love you, Grandma," in her careful 8-year-old handwriting. I put the photo on my mantle and the drawing on my refrigerator, next to the grocery lists Linda helped me write, and the appointment cards from Dr. Chen. 2 months after that, the phone rang on a Sunday afternoon. Tommy's voice, uncertain but determined. "Grandma Bernice? It's Tommy. Mom doesn't know I'm calling." My heart nearly stopped. "Tommy, how did you get this number?" "I found it in Mom's phone. Grandma, Are you really living on a ranch? I am. With horses? I laughed, looking out the window where Tom was working with the cattle. No horses, but lots of cows and chickens and the most beautiful mountains you've ever seen. Could Sarah and I visit sometime when we're older? Oh, sweetheart, you could visit anytime your mother says it's okay. She says you don't want to see us anymore. The lie hit me like a physical blow. That's not true, Tommy. I will always want to see you. But sometimes grown-ups have disagreements that make things complicated. Is it because Mom did something bad? Smart boy. Too smart for his own good, probably. It's because I finally learned to stand up for myself. Good, he said fiercely. You should stand up for yourself. After we hung up, I called Mr. Mills. I want to set up college funds for Tommy and Sarah, I said. Funds that Astrid can't touch, that go directly to them when they turn 18. That's very generous, Mrs. Walsh. It's not generous. It's an investment in the future. Someday, when they're adults, they'll have questions about what happened to their family. When they do, I want them to know that their grandmother never stopped loving them. 6 months later, I was feeding the chickens when I saw a familiar car coming up the ranch road. My heart clenched with old instincts, the urge to run, to hide, to avoid confrontation. Instead, I finished scattering the feed and waited. Astrid got out of her car slowly, looking around at the ranch with something that might have been wonder. She'd lost weight, and there were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. Hello, Mom. Hello, Astrid. We looked at each other across the farmyard. Two women who'd hurt each other in ways that might never fully heal. The kids miss you, she said finally. I miss them too. Tommy keeps asking when he can visit. Sarah draws pictures of you all the time. I waited, not making it easy for her. I came to apologize. Really apologize. Not just try to get you to come back so things could go back to the way they were. And to tell you that Marcus and I are getting divorced. When he found out you weren't going to give us access to the inheritance, he showed his true colors. It turns out I wasn't the only person he was stealing from. I felt a flicker of sympathy, but not surprise. I'm sorry. Are you? I'm sorry you're in pain. I'm sorry the kids are going through a divorce. I'm not sorry that you're learning who Marcus really is. Astrid nodded, tears starting to fall. I know I don't have the right to ask this, but could we start over? Not go back to the way things were, but maybe build something new? I looked at my daughter, really looked at her, and saw something I hadn't seen in years. Humility, real remorse, the beginning of change. That depends, I said. On what? On whether you're here because you want a relationship with me, or because you want something from me. I want my mother back, she whispered. I want the kids to know their grandmother. I want to stop being the person who abandoned you. It wasn't everything. It wasn't a magic wand that would erase 3 years of pain and decades of taking me for granted, but it was a beginning. Would you like to come in for coffee? I asked. As we walked toward the house together, I caught sight of myself in the reflection of the front window. The woman looking back at me was straight-backed, confident, alive. She was wearing work boots and jeans that actually fit her. Her hair was pulled back in a practical ponytail, and her face was tan from spending time outdoors. She looked like someone who knew her own worth. George had been right. I deserved better than what I'd been accepting. But more than that, I'd finally learned that I had the power to demand it. The ranch spread out around us, mine now in every sense that mattered. The mountains stood guard in the distance, unchanging and strong. And for the first time in my 67 years, I was exactly where I belonged. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile, I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.